Today's project is a sweet little Shadowbox frame Valentine. I learned how to make these Shadowbox frames by watching a video posted by Julie DiMatteo. You can find Julie at Paper Pixie on YouTube. The tools I used for this project are a simply scored scoring tool, a bone folder, a pair of paper snips, and I also used the heartfelt bundle with the included heart punches. The adhesives I used were multi-purpose liquid glue, tear and tape, Stampin' Dimensionals, and mini glue dots. Embellishments were pastel pearls and the sheer gorgeous grape ribbon. My cardstock is Purple Posy, and my designer series paper is from the Hydrangea Hill paper pack. You'll find a link to a complete shopping list in the description of this video. Begin with a piece of 6x6 cardstock in your simply scored scoring tool. We're going to score all four sides of this square at the following dimensions: 3/8, 3/4, 1 1/8, and 1 1/2 inches. We're going to do that on all four sides. So again, that's at 3/8, 3/4, 1 1/8, and 1 1/2. And just repeat that on all four sides. Next, we're going to make two short score lines at both the top and the bottom of our cardstock. These lines will help us in cutting later. Come in 1 7/8 inches and score down just to the second horizontal score line. So you come in 1 7/8 inches and score down just to that second score line that's already there. Then come over to 4 1/8 and do the same thing, just scoring down to that second horizontal score line that's already on your cardstock. And here you can see, I'm going to flip it around, you can see these two shorter score lines that I've just made. Now rotate the paper 180 degrees and make those same two short score lines on the other side. Score at 1 7/8, coming down to the second score line that's already there. And then come over to 4 1/8 and make the same short score line down to the second horizontal line that's already there. You can set your scoring tool to the side for now. Next thing we're going to do is crease and burnish on all the long score lines, just the lines that go all the way across the cardstock. We will not be creasing on those short score lines that we just made, just on the lines that go all the way across the cardstock. Now that we have everything creased and burnished, we're going to do a little bit of cutting. We want the two short score lines at the top and the bottom. And we're going to come in with our paper snips to the fourth score line, and we're going to cut straight up to the fourth horizontal score line. Then we're going to come into the third vertical score line and cut up to the fourth horizontal score line. That's going to make two loose flaps, a big one and a smaller one, a wide one and a thinner one. And we're just going to cut off that wider flap. Just snip that off. And then we're going to make a short tab of the narrow strip that's left. We're going to cut on the third score line from the bottom and just make a little tab, just like that. Repeat this on the left side of the paper, coming in 4 score lines and cutting up to the 4th horizontal score line, then come into the 3rd vertical score line and cut up to that same 4th horizontal score line. Cut off the larger flap that you just made and leave the narrow flap. So just turn your cardstock slightly, snip off that larger flap, and then trim the narrow flap down to a tab. So now you can see we have a large center flap and 2 small tabs. Now rotate the cardstock 180 degrees and repeat this on the other side. Come in 4 vertical score lines, cut up to the 4th horizontal score line, then come into the 3rd vertical score line and cut up to the 4th horizontal score line. Now rotate the paper just slightly and trim off that larger flap. And trim that narrow flap on the 3rd horizontal score line so that you have a little tab left. Now repeat on the left side, coming in 4 score lines, cutting up to the 4th horizontal score line, then come in 3 score lines, trimming up to the 4th horizontal score line, turning, cutting off that larger flap, and then trimming the narrow flap down to a tab. Next, we're going to make some cuts that will give us the nice angled mitered corners on our Shadowbox frame. We'll be using those short score lines that we made as reference points for our cutting. I'm going to draw a line on my cardstock to show you exactly where we're cutting. You won't draw this line, you'll just be cutting, but I want you to see what I'm talking about. We're going to cut up to where that short score line ends, and we're going to start our cut at the 3rd horizontal score line. So here I've drawn a line, and you can see I start my cut from the right edge on the 3rd horizontal score line and cut up to where that short score line ends. Then I turn the cardstock and just cut straight down on that short score line, and I've cut out a little notch in that flap. Now we're going to repeat this on the other side of the flap, and since I'm right-handed, I like to turn the cardstock over so I can come at this from the right edge, start on the 3rd horizontal line from the top, come in at an angle, and stop where that short score line ends. Then turn your paper and cut straight down on that short score line to remove that little section. Rotate your paper 180 degrees and repeat this process on the opposite flap. Remember, if you're right-handed, come in from the right side, start on that 3rd horizontal score line from the top, cut it in an angle to where the short score line ends, then turn the paper slightly, come down, cutting on that short score line and remove that little section. Then repeat on the other side of the flap. Turn the paper or the cardstock over to make it easier to access. Come in on the 3rd horizontal score line from the top, cutting up at an angle to where the short score line ends. Then come down on that short score line and remove that little section. Next, I want to trim all of my tabs to help with assembly. So I'm just going to go around all the outside flaps right now and trim the tabs, the very end pieces, at an angle. I'm just angling each of these outermost flaps. This will help when we're assembling the frame. It'll help everything fit nicely. Once I have all the larger flaps trimmed, I will trim the small tabs, the very tiny tabs that were left, just coming in at an angle, and I'm folding back the larger flap so that I don't accidentally cut it while I'm trimming these small tabs. And again, I'm just mitering these so they fit more easily when we assemble our frame. After all of the flaps and tabs have been trimmed at an angle, it's time to apply our adhesive. The first adhesive that we'll use will be tear and tape, and we're going to apply it to the outer flaps, the large flaps on the outside of the frame. You'll notice that everything's kind of curved away from me. I'm working on what I call the outside of the frame right now, and I'm just applying tear and tape to the very outer section of each of these large tabs. After I have adhesive on all the wider flaps, I want to put a little bit on the tiny tabs, and I like to use my paper snips and just cut off a piece of the tear and tape. I find it easier than trying to maneuver the whole roll. So I'm going to go around and do that on each of these small tabs. I'm still working on what I call the outside of the frame. You can see how everything is curving away from me here. So go ahead and apply a little bit of tear and tape to each of those small tabs working on the outside of the frame. You should have tear and tape on all of the outer sections of the wide flaps and on the tiny tabs. Flip your cardstock over, and we're going to apply tear and tape to those angled cuts we made on the inside. I'm going to use my paper snips and cut my tear and tape again like I did for the tabs. I just find that easier for these smaller sections. When you're laying the tear and tape along the angle, it's okay if you cross over the score lines. That won't matter at all. You just want to line your tear and tape up parallel with the edge of those angled cuts. So apply your tear and tape to each of those 4 angled cuts on the inside of the frame. Now that our adhesive is in place, we're ready to start giving our shadow box its shape. We're going to start by folding in the 2 sides that do not have the angled cuts on them. And we're going to fold on the first and the third score lines when we do this, the first and the third. So remove the backing from your tear and tape on that outer flap. I'm using a take your pick tool here. I find that easier. Fold over on the first score line and the third score line and just press it flat. Then rotate your cardstock 180 degrees and do the same thing on the other side. We're going to fold on the first and the third score lines and just press it flat. So you'll remove the backing on the tear and tape again. Sometimes it's a little tricky. That's why I like using this take your pick tool. It helps me get underneath that backing. There we go. Then peel that off, and again we're folding on the first and the third score lines, and we're just pressing that flat. Then you can just gently push in on the sides and pop those boxes that you just made up. And there you have the first 2 sides of your shadow box frame. We'll work on the angled sides now, and the first thing I do is remove all of the backings of the tear and tape on one end. I'm going to remove the backings from the small tabs, from the angled cuts, and from the wide flap, working on just one end right now. And the reason I remove all of the backing at this point is because it's easier to get the backing off now before you begin any of the steps for folding these ends in. So here again, I'm using the take your pick tool and just working with those backings and peeling them off. If you find a piece of tear and tape hanging over anywhere, just fold it back on itself and that will take care of it. So the first thing we're going to do here is fold in that tiny tab and then bring up the wide flap, squaring up the edges there. Make a nice square corner here and let the flap make contact with the tiny tab. Then do the other side. Oops, my tab was not tucked in. So tuck in that tab, bring up the flap, and just square up that corner. Make a nice square corner here. My corner didn't quite adhere, so I'm pressing that in place again. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is roll this adhesive down and inside. We want to create a little box here like we did on the sides, and we want the edge of this flap to meet that bottom corner. You'll feel it when it bumps up against that bottom corner, and then just press everything down. Press on those angled corners to get good adhesion. Press down on the box you just made gently so the adhesive adheres to the back of your frame. Now remove all of the backing from the adhesives on the remaining side of your frame. So just like we did on the other side, the first thing we'll do is bring that flap up to meet the tiny tab and create nice square corners here. Just use your fingers to kind of feel, make sure everything's even on both sides. And then make sure you get good contact with the adhesive. Then once you do that, tuck in the outer flap and bring it down, roll it in to meet the bottom back edge of this side of the frame. And you'll feel when the edge of that tab meets the bottom back edge. And once it does, just gently press down on everything so the adhesive makes good contact with the back of the shadow box. Press down on those angles a little bit, and there you go. Next, we'll decorate the inside of our shadow box frame. I used a piece of Hydrangea Hill Designer Series paper cut to 2 1/8 inch by 2 1/8 inch. It's a square, and I'm just showing here the Hydrangea Hill paper. It's a beautiful paper found in the January through June mini catalog, the 2021 mini catalog. The 2 1/8 inch dimension gives you a little wiggle room here. The opening of the box is actually 2 1/4, but I like to give myself a little room here in case the frame is off a little bit. And I'm going to adhere this Designer Series paper with multi-purpose liquid glue, and that'll allow me to move it around just a little bit and get it centered in there. My sentiment was stamped with gorgeous grape ink on a piece of Whisper White cardstock, and the sentiment came from the Heartfelt stamp set. I punched the sentiment out with the smooth edge heart and then made a backing for it from gorgeous grape cardstock punched with the scalloped edge heart, and both of those hearts are included in the Heartfelt bundle. In my first sample, I popped the heart up on a single layer of Stampin' Dimensionals, but I think for this version, I'm going to put 2 layers of Stampin' Dimensionals on the back of my heart. So the way that I do that is I just put down the Stampin' Dimensionals. I'm going to use 3 here. And then I'll peel off the backings of those and add another layer of Stampin' Dimensionals right on top of them. So I'm just going to add another layer of Stampin' Dimensionals right over top the ones I've laid down. Just stick them together like that and peel off the backings as I go. And I think what this is going to do, it's going to pop the heart a little further forward inside the shadow box, and I think that'll be a prettier effect, having it popped up just a little more dimension inside that shadow box. So I like to put my heart in at an angle. These hearts do fit straight up and down inside this box as it's sized, but I like my heart to be at an angle in there. Yes, I think that looks nice with the extra layer of dimensionals. Next, I'm going to add a pearl from the Pastel Pearls set. These are so pretty, and they are part of the Hydrangea Hill suite in the January through June mini catalog. So I'm just going to add one of these pearls to the heart, and then I'm going to tie a bow from the Gorgeous Grape sheer ribbon, which is also part of the Hydrangea Hill suite. I recently saw another demonstrator using pins to keep her ribbon in place on the spools, and I thought, well, that's a great idea. So I went out and got some pins, and mine happened to have a little flower on the top, so they're easy to grab and easier to see when they're laying on my craft table. So just a great tip, one of those why didn't I think of that before kind of tips. So I'm just going to tie my bow here. Again, this is the Gorgeous Grape sheer ribbon. And I'm just going to use a mini glue dot to adhere my ribbon to my frame. I'm going to put it in the upper right corner of my frame, and I like using mini glue dots for this kind of purpose. They hold very securely, and they're easy to work with on the back of a bow. You can use this Shadowbox frame just the way it is. It would be really cute adhered to a box of candy or some other gift. But I also like to put a stand on the back of these so that the recipient can stand them up on the counter or on their desk maybe. I think that's a cute way to use these. So I'm going to show you how to make the little stand that goes on the back now. Start with a piece of cardstock in the same color as your frame, 1.5 by 5 1/4 inch. And then we're going to score that with our Simply Scored scoring tool, and we're going to score it at 1/2, 1 inch, 3 and 5 inches. So that's 1/2, 1, 3 and 5. Mountain fold at the first score line, valley fold at the second score line, that's the 1/2 inch and the 1 inch score lines, then valley fold at the 3 inch score line, and valley fold again at the 5 inch score line. With multi-purpose liquid glue, adhere that small tab to the first tab on the left. So I'm just applying a little bit of glue to this tab, and then I'm adhering it to the larger tab on the opposite end of this strip. That small tab is folded in, and I'm just lining up the edges there. When I adhere this to the back of my frame, I want to make sure that that little seam that I just made is against the frame. So I'm using multi-purpose liquid glue here. I'm keeping that seam so that it'll be against the back of the frame. And I'll line up the bottom of the stand with the bottom of my Shadowbox frame. Make sure you have it oriented correctly. And just centered on the back of the frame. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want to line up the bottom of the stand with the bottom of the frame. You can use your bone folder if you want to just kind of run inside there and make sure you get good contact. So now your recipient can stand up their Valentine on a shelf or on their desk. Another idea for these would be to make a little get well or thinking of you project. Here's an example I made using the Back on Your Feet stamp set. I just stamped the turtle and colored him with the Stampin' Blends alcohol markers. And for this example, I stamped my sentiment on a piece of white cardstock and then layered it on coordinating cardstock and put it on the outside of the frame. These little Shadowbox frames are best for hand delivering. You wouldn't want to send these through the mail unless you put them inside a larger package where they would be protected. I hope you'll give a Shadowbox frame a try. This is a great little project. Even if you don't especially like 3D projects, I think this is a cute one to try maybe for Valentine's Day. And if you enjoyed today's video, give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm Kim Ray. I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you again next time.